building a serverless data lake analytics pipeline with a New York City yellow taxi dataset today. So S3 will ingest the dataset. If new data is uploaded, Lambda will trigger a new crawler with AWS Glue. I'll use Athena to query the data and QuickSight to visualize everything with the data. You can get the dataset I'm using from the description below. For the dataset, there's also a sheet that explains each field, meaning and description. I begin downloading each of the parquet files for New York City yellow taxi trip data that will be used to be uploaded to S3. Once all of them are downloaded, I went to S3 to create the bucket to store the trip data in the bucket to be used with other AWS services later. I created a folder to store the raw data of all the parquet files. Using the following command, I uploaded all of the trip data files to S3 inside the raw folder of my bucket. I refreshed the page and all of them are uploaded successfully. Then I went to IAM to create a role for Lambda that will allow Lambda to start the glue crawler. If a new file is uploaded to S3, it will trigger a new crawler. However, I forgot to include more data at the end to test this, but it still makes for a great pipeline because when I downloaded it, I should have done it by uploading a few by bit. I also created a service role for Glue, which will allow Glue to read the dataset files. Inside AWS Glue, I created a database, set up the crawler, included the data source from S3, added a service role I created, set up the target database, and created the crawler. After setting up Glue crawler, I wrote the code for the Lambda function and set up S3 trigger, so when a new file gets added to S3, it will trigger a new pipeline. But as I said, I just forgot and should have uploaded the parquets in parts rather than all of it at once. I ran the crawler and I created the entire schema with column names and data types. After setting up the pipeline, I went into Athena to start querying data from the pipeline. I started by getting the total count of the database in Glue. The next query I ran was to get the pickup location IDs along with the total trip count, and then I displayed the top 10 locations in descending order. After that, I wanted to analyze trips by hour, so I extracted the hour from the pickup date time, grouped the trips together, and ordered the results from highest to lowest. From the results, we can see that 6 PM was the busiest pickup time. Next, I calculated the average fare amount, which came out to be about $18 per trip. I then created another query to calculate the daily revenue generated from taxi rides. After that, I wrote a query to identify the longest trip rides along with fare amounts associated with them. The next query analyzed trips by payment type. Looking at the dataset documentation for the payment type values, we can see that the credit card payment was the most commonly used for this case. Finally, I wrote a query to analyze trips by hour and pickup destination. What I want to do now is to get to the zone lookup table. So I downloaded it and created a new folder in my S3 bucket for lookup. Then uploaded the files to the lookup folder. I tested to make sure that the data will align by joining them in the query and seeing if it will display. I joined the tables together to get the string names of the locations. I went to QuickSight, went through the setup, selected the database taxi.db, selected the full data, but then it failed. So the issue was that I needed to grant QuickSight access to S3 bucket. So I went to look for the QuickSight service role and added S3 list bucket and get object. Once I fixed that, the status went from failed to completed. Once in QuickSight, I started adding elements from various pie charts, KPIs, tables, horizontal bars, and more to collect various data from the dataset and visualize it all as much as I could. Even when we hover over charts or pie charts, we can see values inside of it. For example, on sum of passengers count by pickup zone, we can see that the Roseville Woodrow average trip cost was $99.19. So throughout the rest of this, I was just adding anything and seeing what data I can gather from the New York City trip dataset and visualize it in some way and create a report. The report will also be included in the GitHub page for AWShorts if you're interested. And I guess this will just conclude. Thank you for watching. Also, other files will be included on the GitHub page for this episode, including the Lambda code, queries I wrote, and more.